It was just after 3 in the morning when the first sound broke the silence of my house. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again, heavy pounding against my front door. My dogs, both trained K9s, shot up instantly, their low growls echoing through the dark hallway. I hadn't expected anyone at this hour, and when I glanced at the security feed, my heart nearly stopped. Standing on my porch was none other than Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the hoe, fumbling with something in her hands like she had every right to be there. She always bragged about having a master key to every house in the neighborhood, a claim I'd brushed off as another one of her power trips. But now, watching her try and fail to jam something into my lock, it was clear she'd actually tried to make good on her threat. When the key didn't work, frustration took over, and that's when she did the unthinkable. She started kicking my door. Each thud rattled through the quiet night, my dog's barking growing louder, sharper, more protective with every hit. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just another petty hoe complaint or her usual shouting across the street about my lawn. This was her trying to force her way into my home while I was inside, asleep, with my dogs ready to defend me. The air felt heavy with tension as I reached for my phone, torn between calling the police or letting my K9s remind her exactly whose territory she was trespassing on. What happened next turned that night into a story I'll never forget. I stayed by the window, gripping my phone as the pounding grew louder. The dogs paced back and forth in front of the door, their bodies tense, ears pricked, waiting for my command. It wasn't the first time Karen had crossed a line, but never had she taken it this far. For months, she had been a constant problem in the neighborhood, showing up unannounced, slipping notes under doors, and spreading rumors about anyone who didn't follow her version of hoe rules. She claimed she was protecting property values, but everyone knew she thrived on control. Just a week before this night, she'd cornered me in the driveway, insisting that my porch light was too bright and my mailbox wasn't regulation. When I brushed her off, her eyes narrowed in a way that told me she wasn't used to people saying no. Now, standing outside my door at 3 in the morning, she looked like someone who had finally snapped. I couldn't shake the thought of that so-called master key she always bragged about. How many other neighbors had she tried this on? And why my house tonight? The security camera showed her pausing between kicks, pulling something from her jacket pocket like she was considering another attempt to break in. The dogs erupted again, slamming their weight against the door, and for a split second I saw her hesitate. But instead of leaving, she leaned in closer, shouting something I couldn't make out. The mix of fear and anger boiling inside me was hard to control. I didn't want to escalate things, but I also couldn't just let her keep pushing. Every second she stayed there felt like the line between annoyance and danger was disappearing, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go. Through the glass I could see Karen pacing on my porch, her shadows stretching long under the dim streetlight. She kept glancing around like she was making sure no one else was watching, which only made me wonder if this wasn't the first time she had pulled something like this. The neighborhood had been quiet for months, but there were always whispers about her showing up at other people's homes late at night, claiming she was checking on violations. Most neighbors brushed it off as exaggeration, but seeing her there at my door, I realized those stories might have been true. Inside, the dogs pressed harder against the wood, their growls rattling in their chests. They weren't just barking to scare her. They were preparing to defend me if that door gave way. I knew how protective they were, and I also knew that one wrong move from her could set them off. That thought made the situation even more dangerous. Part of me wondered what she was after. Was this about control? Revenge because I had refused to fix things she complained about? Or was there something deeper that none of us knew? The way she muttered to herself between kicks made it seem less about hoe rules and more like some personal vendetta. I thought back to conversations I'd had with other neighbors. One family down the street admitted Karen had threatened to fine them daily for parking their RV in their own driveway. Another neighbor told me she once claimed she had the right to inspect their backyard for unsanctioned landscaping. Each story felt ridiculous at the time, but standing there in the middle of the night, hearing her slam at my door, it all connected into something much darker. I stayed frozen, knowing this wasn't just another hoe complaint anymore. It was a line that once crossed would change everything. Karen's pounding turned frantic, each kick shaking the door harder than the last. The frame creaked under the pressure, and the sound of her heel against the wood echoed through the quiet street. My heart raced, every instinct telling me this wasn't just some dramatic tantrum. She was determined to force her way in. The dogs were now in a frenzy, claws scratching against the floor, their sharp barks reverberating through the hallway like a warning siren. I pressed my phone tight in my hand, hovering over the call button for the police, but a part of me froze, almost paralyzed by the absurdity of it all. This was my own neighbor, the Ho president, the woman who constantly lectured everyone about rules and order. Yet here she was, at 3 in the morning, looking unhinged and relentless. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned down, shouting through the crack of the door. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught fragments, accusations about breaking Ho bylaws and endangering the community. Her voice shook, but it wasn't from fear. It was raw anger, like she believed every word. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to stop on her own. The motion lights flicked on in the yard, and I saw her face clearly for the first time that night. Her eyes were wild, her hair a mess, and she clutched the so-called master key tightly in her hand, as if it proved she had some twisted authority. She raised it up like she might try again, jamming it into the lock until the metal scraped and squealed. The dogs erupted, lunging so hard the door actually shook. My pulse hammered in my ears. She was seconds away from crossing a line, and I knew whatever happened next would decide everything. Just as the dogs slammed against the door again, a new sound cut through the chaos, footsteps on the gravel outside. My stomach dropped. For a split second, I thought maybe another neighbor had come out to see what was going on, but when I glanced at the camera feed, I saw something that made the situation spiral even further. Someone else was standing at the edge of my yard. It wasn't a police officer, and it definitely wasn't a curious neighbor. It was a man I'd never seen before, tall and silent, watching Karen with an odd kind of detachment. He didn't move closer, didn't say anything, just stood there like he was waiting for her to finish whatever she was doing. Karen glanced back at him once, and the way she lowered her voice after that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about her trying to break in anymore. She wasn't acting alone. The thought that she might have dragged someone else into this twisted obsession sent the tension spiking even higher. Who was he? Another Ho board member? Someone she convinced to back her up? Or worse, someone who had no idea what they were about to be part of? Karen went back to rattling the door, but now every slam felt heavier with that man standing nearby, like she had backup. My dogs sensed it too. Their growls deepened, more primal, as if they knew the threat outside had just doubled. I edged closer to the door, phone still in my hand, torn between hitting call and staying quiet to avoid making things worse. But one thing was clear. Karen wasn't just on a power trip anymore. Whatever this was, it had escalated into something none of us could have predicted. And it was far from over. Karen's final kick rattled the frame so hard I thought the lock might snap. But before she could strike again, the man in the yard suddenly stepped forward. My dogs went wild, their teeth snapping against the wood, as if they knew this was the breaking point. I gripped the handle tight, ready for anything, when the man's voice finally broke the silence. "Enough, Karen." The sound froze her in place. She spun around, furious, yelling at him to stay out of it. But his tone wasn't aggressive. It was steady, almost authoritative. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't her accomplice at all. He was the one who had been following her to make sure she didn't go too far. The tension between them cracked open a whole new layer to the chaos on my porch. Karen shouted back, claiming she had the right to enter my home because of Ho violations, her voice cracking as if she truly believed it. The man shook his head, stepped closer, and pulled something from his pocket, his phone. He was recording everything. I finally yanked open the blinds, letting the dog's snarls pour into the night. Karen's face twisted when she realized I was watching, but what caught her off guard was that she was caught on 2 cameras now, mine and the man's. She backed away slowly, still muttering, still clutching that useless master key. but the fight was draining out of her. The police arrived minutes later, lights flashing down the street, called not by me, but by the man who had been trailing her. They escorted her off my property while my neighbors, awakened by the noise, gathered at their porches. For the first time, everyone saw the lengths she had gone to. But the twist came the next morning, when I learned the truth. That man wasn't just a neighbor, he was a private investigator hired by several frustrated residents. Karen's midnight stunt had finally given them all the evidence they needed. And as strange as it sounds, her attempt to break into my home ended up breaking her hold on the entire neighborhood. By the next day, the neighborhood felt different. Word spread quickly about what happened on my porch, and for once, people weren't whispering in fear of Karen, they were talking openly. The private investigator explained that he had been hired after multiple families complained about her harassment, but no one had ever been able to prove just how far she was willing to go. My security footage, paired with his recording, left no room for denial. She hadn't just been overstepping HOA boundaries, she had turned her role into a personal obsession. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, and this time the community showed up in force. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet finally spoke about their own experiences, unauthorized inspections, threats of fake fines, and late-night visits meant to intimidate. It was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing to see everyone united. By the end of that week, Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, and new leadership was voted in. For me, the biggest relief was that I could finally sleep without wondering if someone would show up at my door in the middle of the night. My K9s stayed on alert for a few days after, pacing whenever they heard a noise outside, but even they seemed to sense the shift. The street felt calmer, lighter, almost like we'd all taken back control of our own homes. Looking back, it's still unsettling to think how far she pushed things, but it also proved something important. No matter how much power someone pretends to have, they can't stand against the truth. The cameras, the community, and even the dogs played a part in exposing her. In the end, the neighborhood wasn't just safer, it was finally free.